The knife clattered against my plate as Dad's words hit me like a physical blow. Your brother deserves the family business, Laura. You just don't have what it takes. 37 family members sat around the mahogany tables at our flagship restaurant, witnessing my public execution. Jake smirked from across the room while aunts and uncles avoided eye contact. I smiled and nodded in agreement, watching Dad's surprised expression. What I had, instead of what it takes, was something far more powerful. Patent rights to every single recipe, sauce, and spice blend that built our $30 million empire. The irony tasted sweeter than our famous Rosa Rosa sauce as I continued cutting my chicken parmesan. Around me, conversations resumed in hushed tones, family members stealing glances while processing Dad's announcement. Frank Rossetti had just declared my brother Jake the heir to Rossetti's restaurant group, our 15-location empire stretching across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. The decision shocked no one except perhaps Jake himself, who had been coasting on charm and last-name privilege for 28 years. I sipped my wine and watched Jake accept congratulations with his trademark grin. My twin brother possessed that effortless charisma that made servers laugh and customers feel special. Dad saw leadership potential in Jake's ability to work a room. What Dad missed was that running restaurants required more than handshakes and backslapping. The weight of my secret pressed against my chest like a hidden treasure. 6 years of careful planning, late nights in my apartment, converting traditional recipes into precise chemical formulations, meetings with patent attorneys, lab work documenting every innovation. While Jake charmed customers and Dad praised his natural business instincts, I had built something none of them understood. Legal ownership of everything that made Rossetti's profitable. My journey began 12 years ago in Grandmother Elena's kitchen. She taught me to cook with intuition, tasting and adjusting until flavors sang together perfectly. Elena would pinch herbs between weathered fingers, adding a little of this, a touch of that, until magic happened. But I wanted to understand the science behind the magic. During my chemistry degree at Penn State, I became fascinated with molecular gastronomy and food science. Elena's traditional recipes were brilliant, but they relied entirely on individual skill and experience. I realized I could modernize them, creating consistent formulations that maintained the heart of her cooking while ensuring quality across multiple locations. The Rosa Rosa sauce took me 2 years to perfect. Elena's original recipe called for San Marzano tomatoes, good olive oil, garlic, until it smells like heaven, and secret spices. I spent months in my apartment kitchen, analyzing pH levels, testing different tomato varieties, documenting precise measurements. The breakthrough came when I discovered the exact combination of oregano, basil, and a touch of fennel pollen that recreated Elena's secret spices. But I didn't stop there. I enhanced the recipe with natural umami boosters and stabilizers that gave our sauce its distinctive depth and extended shelf life. The final formulation involved 23 specific ingredients in precise ratios, combined using a particular heating process that activated flavor compounds at specific temperatures. Nana's secret spice blend followed the same process. Elena's handful of this, pinch of that, became a scientifically formulated mixture of 17 herbs and spices, ground to specific particle sizes, and blended in exact proportions. The Golden Mile garlic butter compound involved 6 types of garlic processed different ways, combined with cultured butter and herb oils, infused at controlled temperatures. Each innovation required documentation, lab testing, and legal protection. I learned about intellectual property law, understanding that recipe formulations could be patented when they involved specific processes or novel combinations. Working with Patricia Morrison, a food industry patent attorney, I filed applications for every major recipe and process that gave Rossetti's its competitive advantage. Dad and Jake assumed I was just helping in the kitchen during family events. They never questioned my detailed notebooks or why I insisted on precise measurements for staff training. When our food costs dropped 20% and customer satisfaction scores soared, Dad credited Jake's management skills and his own business acumen. The family saw me as Frank's dedicated daughter, always willing to help but lacking the boldness needed for leadership. I was the quiet one who preferred lab work to schmoozing with vendors. They interpreted my methodical nature as lack of vision, rather than recognizing it as systematic planning. Marcus Rodriguez, our head chef, understood my true contributions. He watched me develop each recipe, test variations, and train kitchen staff on proper techniques. Marcus knew that Jake couldn't distinguish between oregano and basil, much less understand the chemistry that made our food exceptional. Tonight's dinner announcement fulfilled my deepest fears and greatest hopes simultaneously. Dad's public dismissal hurt more than I expected, but it also freed me from family loyalty constraints. I had spent years protecting them from their own ignorance about what built their success. Now that protection was no longer my responsibility. As dessert arrived and Jake basked in congratulations, I calculated the scope of my legal position. Every signature item on every menu across all 15 locations depended on my patented formulations. The take-home sauce line that generated $2 million annually? Mine. The spice blends sold in grocery stores? Mine. The proprietary marinade processes that set our steaks apart? All mine. Jake raised his wine glass, toasting the future of Rossetti's restaurant group. I smiled and lifted my glass, silently toasting the moment my real education in business warfare would begin. Funny how quickly I was about to develop exactly what it takes. 2 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our original Penn Hills location, watching Jake destroy everything Elena had built. As the newly crowned CEO of Rossetti's restaurant group, my brother had launched his leadership tenure with the subtlety of a wrecking ball. His first executive decision involved firing Maria Santos, our 62-year-old assistant manager who had worked for the family since before Jake and I were born. Her crime? Questioning his plan to replace our hand-cut French fries with frozen ones to streamline operations and maximize efficiency. Maria had politely explained that customers specifically drove across town for our fresh-cut fries, but Jake dismissed her concerns as old-school thinking. The termination meeting happened in Dad's old office, now redecorated with modern furniture and motivational posters. Jake sat behind the imposing desk like a king holding court, explaining to Maria that the restaurant industry was evolving, and employees needed to embrace change or find opportunities elsewhere. Maria left in tears, carrying a cardboard box containing 26 years of memories. 3 more longtime employees followed Maria out the door that first week. Tony Palermo, who managed our supplier relationships and had negotiated cost-saving contracts for a decade, got eliminated for redundancy when Jake decided to centralize purchasing through a single corporate vendor. Linda Walsh, our experienced front-of-house trainer who maintained service standards across all locations, was deemed unnecessary overhead, as Jake planned to implement simplified training videos. I watched this purge from my official position as Kitchen Operations Coordinator, a title Jake created to keep me busy while excluding me from real decision-making. My daily responsibilities included inventory management, recipe documentation for staff training, and quality control across locations. Jake viewed these tasks as administrative busy work, never understanding that I was documenting every change he made and its impact on our operations. The frozen French fry switch provided my first major data point. Customer complaint scores for the Penn Hills location increased 47% within 3 weeks. Jake dismissed the feedback as adjustment period resistance, but I documented every complaint call and negative online review. Customers specifically mentioned that the fries tasted like cardboard and nothing like what Rossetti's used to serve. Jake's next innovation involved hiring celebrity chef consultation firm to elevate our brand presence and menu sophistication. This Los Angeles-based company charged $50,000 to redesign our menu with trendy items like deconstructed lasagna and artisanal vegetable medleys. The consultants spent 2 days photographing our kitchen, interviewing staff, and taking notes, then disappeared for 6 weeks before delivering a 40-page report recommending we abandon our dated Italian-American comfort food concept in favor of contemporary fusion dining experiences. The menu overhaul eliminated 8 of our most popular dishes, including Elena's famous stuffed shells and the chicken marsala that food critics had praised for 15 years. Jake replaced them with items requiring ingredients we had never used: duck breast, truffle oil, microgreens, and specialty cheeses that tripled our food costs for those dishes. Marcus tried reasoning with Jake during a tense kitchen meeting. These new recipes don't make sense for our customer base or our price points, he explained, holding up the celebrity chef recommendations. A $28 duck breast dish in Penn Hills? Our regular customers are working families, not Beverly Hills food bloggers. Jake's response revealed his complete disconnect from our restaurant's identity. We need to attract younger, more affluent demographics, Marcus. The old Italian grandmother routine worked for Dad's generation, but millennials want Instagram-worthy dining experiences. We're not running a neighborhood diner here, but we essentially were running neighborhood diners. Rosetti's success had always come from being the place where 3 generations of the same family could afford to eat together, where the food tasted like something Elena might have cooked, where servers knew regular customers' names and dietary restrictions. Jake wanted to transform us into something we had never been and could never successfully become. I bit my tongue during these discussions, maintaining my supportive facade while internally cataloging every mistake. My detailed reports to Patricia Morrison documented each change and its measurable impact on customer satisfaction, food costs, and employee morale. This documentation would become crucial evidence if legal action became necessary. The Celebrity Chef menu launched with a promotional campaign featuring social media influencers and local food bloggers. Jake spent $12,000 on Instagram advertising and professional food photography. The marketing materials showcased dishes that looked beautiful but bore no resemblance to what Rosetti's had ever served. Customer reactions were swift and brutal. Online reviews dropped from an average of 4.6 stars to 3.1 stars within the first month. Comments consistently mentioned disappointment with the completely different restaurant and confusion about why classic favorites had disappeared. Regular customers felt abandoned and betrayed. Mrs. Patterson, who had been bringing her family to our Penn Hills location for Sunday dinner for 18 years, left a particularly heartbreaking review. We came for my granddaughter's birthday, expecting the warm, familiar experience we've always loved. Instead, we found an overpriced menu full of strange dishes none of us recognized. My husband asked for the chicken parmesan he's ordered for 2 decades, and the server told him it was no longer available. We left and went to Olive Garden. Food costs skyrocketed as Jake's new dishes required expensive ingredients that couldn't be sourced locally or stored efficiently. The duck breast dish that cost us $19 to prepare had to sell for $32 to maintain our profit margins, pricing it completely out of our market demographic. We sold maybe 3 orders per week across all 15 locations. Meanwhile, Jake was planning his masterstroke, franchising the Rosetti's concept nationally. He had begun preliminary discussions with franchise development consultants, envisioning hundreds of locations spreading our elevated Italian-American dining experience across the country. The franchise plan depended entirely on our proprietary recipes and proven operational systems, which Jake believed he owned by virtue of his new title. During a family gathering at Mom and Dad's house, Jake unveiled his expansion vision with characteristic enthusiasm. "We're sitting on a gold mine," he announced, spreading franchise development brochures across the dining room table. "These consultants think we could have 50 locations within 5 years, maybe 200 within a decade. Imagine Rosetti's in every major city from Chicago to Atlanta." Dad beamed with pride while Jake described licensing deals and territory development fees. "The key assets are our signature recipes and brand recognition," Jake continued. "Once we document our systems and processes, we can package everything for franchisees. The profit potential is incredible." I nodded politely while calculating the legal impossibility of Jake's dreams. Every recipe he planned to license belonged to me. Every signature sauce, spice blend, and preparation technique he wanted to franchise was protected by patents filed in my name. Jake was essentially planning to sell products he didn't own, which would constitute fraud on a massive scale. After dinner, as Jake continued enthusing about expansion opportunities, I excused myself to call Patricia Morrison. We needed to discuss timeline and strategy for protecting my intellectual property rights. Jake's franchise plans had accelerated my decision-making timeline considerably. How quickly could he sign binding agreements with franchisees? I asked Patricia during our phone conversation. If he's working with experienced franchise consultants, preliminary agreements could be ready within 60 to 90 days, Patricia replied. Once those contracts are signed, things become much more complicated legally. We should consider sending a formal notification of your patent ownership before he gets too far down this path. I agreed to meet with Patricia the following week to review options and prepare for what was becoming inevitable confrontation with my family. Jake's expansion dreams were about to crash into the reality of intellectual property law, and the collision would destroy either his plans or our family relationships. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the irony of Jake's situation. He was so convinced of his own business genius that he never questioned how he had inherited recipes and systems that took me years to develop. His arrogance had blinded him to the most basic due diligence any competent executive would perform before licensing intellectual property. But then again, Jake had never been competent. He had just been confident, and in our family, confidence had always been mistaken for capability. That confusion was about to become very expensive for everyone involved. 6 months into Jake's reign as CEO, the Monroeville location permanently closed its doors. I stood in the empty dining room on a gray November afternoon, watching contractors remove booth seating that had hosted family celebrations for 12 years. The closure represented more than failed business strategy. It symbolized the beginning of our empire's collapse. The Monroeville restaurant had been our second most profitable location just 18 months earlier. Located in a busy shopping plaza near the mall, it served lunch crowds from surrounding offices and dinner crowds from residential neighborhoods. The customer base consisted largely of families and retirees who appreciated consistent quality and reasonable prices. Jake's menu changes had devastated this loyal customer base. The truffle mac and cheese that replaced Elena's baked ziti cost $14 versus $8 for the original dish. Customers couldn't justify spending 75% more for food that tasted nothing like what they expected from Rossetti's. Lunch business dropped by 60% within 3 months as office workers sought more affordable alternatives. Marcus had tried repeatedly to convince Jake to restore popular items, presenting customer feedback data and sales analytics that clearly demonstrated the problem. Look at these numbers, Marcus had pleaded during a management meeting. Every location that implemented the new menu has seen double-digit revenue declines. Customers are telling us exactly what they want. Jake's response revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of business reality. Short-term adjustment pain is normal when transforming a brand, he had replied, quoting something he'd read in a business magazine. Apple didn't become successful by giving customers what they thought they wanted. We need to train our market to appreciate elevated dining experiences. But Rossetti's wasn't Apple, and hungry families weren't technology early adopters willing to pay premium prices for experimental products. Jake had confused innovation with revolution, failing to understand that successful restaurant evolution builds on existing strengths rather than abandoning them entirely. The financial damage extended beyond lost revenue. Jake's expensive ingredient requirements had destroyed our cost control systems that Dad and I had carefully developed over 15 years. The specialty cheeses for Jake's artisanal pizza selections cost 3 times more than our traditional mozzarella while appealing to fewer customers. Food waste increased dramatically as exotic ingredients spoiled before we could use them effectively. Employee morale plummeted across all locations as experienced staff members struggled with unfamiliar recipes and customer complaints. Sarah Mitchell, who had managed our Peters Township location for 8 years, submitted her resignation letter with a brutal assessment of Jake's leadership. I can't continue working for a company that abandons its customers and disrespects its employees, she wrote. The Rossetti family I joined 8 years ago valued tradition, quality, and community. This new version prioritizes trends over people. 3 more location managers followed Sarah's lead within 2 weeks. These weren't disgruntled employees looking for better opportunities. They were dedicated professionals who had helped build our reputation and felt betrayed by Jake's changes. Their departures created operational chaos as remaining staff struggled with increased responsibilities and unfamiliar management systems. I documented every closure, resignation, and customer complaint in detailed reports for Patricia Morrison. The evidence painted a clear picture of systematic business destruction through poor decision-making. More importantly, for my legal strategy, It demonstrated that Jake's mismanagement was damaging the value of my intellectual property investments. Dad finally began questioning Jake's decisions when our corporate accountant presented quarterly financial reports, showing losses across 13 of our 15 locations. Only the original Penn Hills location and our Southside Pittsburgh restaurant remained marginally profitable, and those margins were shrinking monthly. During a tense family meeting at the corporate office, Dad confronted Jake about the declining numbers. "These losses aren't sustainable, son. We're hemorrhaging money faster than we can generate it. What's your plan to turn things around?" Jake's response involved doubling down on failed strategies rather than acknowledging mistakes. "The market transformation is taking longer than projected, but the fundamentals remain sound. We need to accelerate our franchise development timeline to generate licensing revenue that will offset temporary operational losses." The franchise strategy had become Jake's obsession and potential salvation. He had signed a development agreement with National Restaurant Franchising Corporation, paying them $80,000 to create franchise documentation and find potential partners. The plan involved packaging our proven restaurant concept into replicable systems that franchisees could implement in new markets. Jake's franchise presentation materials featured photos of our signature dishes, detailed descriptions of our proprietary recipes, and testimonials about our time-tested operational systems. Every page of marketing materials was built on intellectual property that belonged to me, not him. He was essentially creating elaborate advertising for products he couldn't legally sell. I had reached my breaking point watching Jake destroy our family legacy while simultaneously planning to profit from intellectual property theft. During a quiet conversation with Marcus in the Penn Hills kitchen, I finally voiced my growing frustration. "This can't continue," I told Marcus while reviewing inventory reports. "He's destroying everything Elena built, and now he wants to franchise recipes that aren't even his to license." Marcus lowered his voice and glanced around the kitchen before responding. "I've been wondering when you'd finally speak up. Everyone knows you developed these recipes, Laura. The kitchen staff asks me all the time why you're letting Jake take credit for your work." I had maintained my silence for months, hoping Jake would recognize his mistakes and course correct before permanent damage occurred. But his franchise plans forced my hand. If Jake signed binding licensing agreements based on my patents, the legal complications could take years to resolve and might destroy my ability to protect my intellectual property rights. That evening, I called Patricia Morrison and requested an emergency meeting. "He's moving forward with franchise agreements," I explained. "If he actually signs contracts promising to license my recipes, we'll have a much more complicated legal situation." Patricia's response was direct and urgent. "You need to assert your patent rights immediately, before he creates legal obligations the company can't fulfill. Once franchise agreements are signed, innocent third parties get involved and everything becomes messier." I scheduled the meeting for the following week, knowing that my decision would trigger events that might destroy my family relationships permanently. But Jake's reckless pursuit of expansion based on stolen intellectual property left me no choice. He had crossed the line from incompetent management to potential fraud. As I drove past our closed Monroeville location that night, I reflected on the cruel irony of the situation. Jake's arrogance and poor judgment were destroying the very business he hoped to expand nationally. He was simultaneously proving Dad wrong about his leadership capabilities, while validating Dad's assessment that I lacked what it takes to run the business. But Dad's evaluation had been based on traditional assumptions about business leadership that emphasized charisma over competence, vision over execution. What neither Dad nor Jake understood was that modern business success required different skills: technical expertise, legal knowledge, strategic planning, and systematic thinking. These were capabilities I had been developing quietly for years, while they focused on personality and presence. Jake's franchise dreams were about to collide with intellectual property reality, and the impact would teach everyone involved about what truly matters in business. Not who talks the best game, but who owns the assets that generate actual value. The education was going to be expensive for everyone except me. I requested a family meeting for the following Sunday afternoon at our parents' house in Upper Street, Clare. Mom set out coffee and her famous biscotti while family members gathered in the living room, expecting another routine business discussion. Jake arrived 15 minutes late, carrying franchise development materials and radiating the confidence of someone who believed he controlled his own destiny. The family assembled represented the core of our restaurant operations. Mom and Dad, Jake, my Uncle Anthony, who managed 3 locations, Aunt Rosa, who handled payroll and human resources, and my cousin Tommy, who supervised maintenance across all properties. These were the people who had built Rossetti's through decades of hard work and family loyalty. I sat in Elena's old chair, a wingback recliner that still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume, and placed a leather portfolio on the coffee table. Patricia Morrison sat beside me, introduced simply as my business attorney. The family exchanged curious glances but maintained polite conversation while everyone settled. I asked Patricia to join us today because we need to discuss some important legal matters regarding our recipe ownership and Jake's franchise plans. I began, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heartbeat. Jake leaned forward with obvious irritation. Laura, we don't need lawyers involved in family business discussions. Whatever concerns you have about the franchise development, I can address them directly. Actually, Jake, you can't address these concerns because they involve intellectual property that you don't own. I opened my portfolio and removed the first patent document. This is patent number 11,245,789 for Rosa Rosa tomato sauce formulation and preparation method, filed 4 years ago and granted 18 months ago. I'm the sole named inventor and patent holder. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush the room. Dad's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips, while Mom's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and dawning comprehension. Jake stared at the document like it was written in a foreign language. That's impossible, Dad finally said, setting down his cup with shaking hands. Those are Elena's recipes, family recipes. They belong to all of us. Patricia spoke for the first time since introductions. Mr. Rossetti, while the original inspirations may have been family recipes, Laura's patents cover specific formulations and processes that she developed independently. Patent law protects novel innovations, regardless of their inspiration sources. I continued removing documents from my portfolio. Patent number 11,267,234 for Nana's secret spice blend composition and manufacturing process. Patent number 11,289,567 for Golden Mile garlic butter compound formulation. Patent number 11,301,445 for Rossetti's proprietary marinade system. I hold 14 patents covering every signature recipe, sauce, spice blend, and preparation method that distinguishes our restaurants from competitors. Jake's confidence evaporated as the reality penetrated his understanding. You can't patent grandmother's recipes. That's stealing from the family. I didn't patent grandmother's recipes, I replied firmly. I developed new formulations inspired by grandmother's cooking but enhanced with modern food science techniques. Elena's original red sauce recipe called for good tomatoes, olive oil, garlic, and secret spices. My patented formulation specifies San Marzano tomatoes processed at exact pH levels, extra virgin olive oil with specific acidity measurements, 23 individual herbs and spices combined in precise ratios, and a heating process that activates flavor compounds at controlled temperatures. Uncle Anthony spoke up from the corner of the room. Laura, even if you improved the recipes, you did that work for the family business. Doesn't that mean the patents belong to the company? Patricia answered before I could respond. Laura filed these patents as an individual inventor using her own resources and time. She wasn't employed by Rossetti's restaurant group in a research and development capacity, nor was she working under any agreement that assigned her inventions to the company. The patents legally and unequivocally belonged to her. I watched Dad process the implications, his face cycling through emotions I'd never seen him express. You've been planning this for years, he said quietly. While we were building the business together as a family, you were secretly creating legal weapons to use against us. The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth wrapped in fundamental misunderstanding. I was protecting my work, I replied. For 6 years, I've watched Jake take credit for innovations he had nothing to do with. I've listened to you praise his business instincts while dismissing my contributions as kitchen help. I filed these patents to ensure my work couldn't be stolen or misrepresented. Jake's shock transformed into desperate anger. This is blackmail. You're trying to destroy the family business because Dad chose me to run it instead of you. I'm not destroying anything, Jake. You've done that entirely on your own. The Monroeville location closed permanently 3 weeks ago. Peters, Township, and Robinson are losing money every month. Your celebrity chef menu changes have alienated our customer base and tripled our food costs. The franchise plans you're so excited about? They're based entirely on recipes you don't own and can't legally license. I pulled out the final document from my portfolio. This is a preliminary franchise agreement between Rossetti's Restaurant Group and Summit Valley Restaurants for a location in Columbus, Ohio. You've already signed this, Jake, promising to provide proprietary recipes and operational systems in exchange for franchise fees and ongoing royalties. Patricia continued the explanation. This agreement constitutes a contract to provide intellectual property that Mr. Jake Rossetti cannot legally deliver. If Summit Valley Restaurants discovers that the promised recipes are protected by patents owned by someone other than Rossetti's Restaurant Group, they could sue for fraud and breach of contract. The room erupted into chaos. Mom started crying while Dad shouted at me about family loyalty. Jake accused me of sabotaging the business out of jealousy while Uncle Anthony and Aunt Rosa tried to understand the legal implications. Tommy sat silently in the corner, shaking his head with what looked like grudging admiration. When the noise subsided, Dad delivered his verdict with cold fury. If this is how you want to play, Laura, then we'll treat it as a business matter. Our lawyers will review these patents and find a way to invalidate them. Elena's recipes belong to this family, not to one selfish daughter who thinks she can hold us hostage. I stood up to leave, gathering my documents while maintaining eye contact with Dad. You're welcome to have your lawyers review the patents. They'll confirm that everything was filed properly and legally. When you're ready to discuss licensing terms that allow the family business to continue operating, Patricia can facilitate those negotiations. Jake's final words followed me to the front door. We'll never pay you a dime for recipes that belong to our family. We'll find a way around your patents. And when we do, you'll regret declaring war on the people who love you. I paused at the threshold, looking back at the family that had raised me and shaped me. I never declared war, Jake. I just stopped pretending that love means accepting theft. As Patricia and I walked to our cars, she offered a sobering assessment. That went about as well as could be expected. You should prepare for them to escalate this conflict before they consider reasonable negotiations. She was right, of course. I had just shattered my family's fundamental assumptions about loyalty, ownership, and business relationships. The revelation would force everyone to choose between acknowledging my rights or fighting a legal battle they couldn't win. Based on their initial reactions, I suspected they would choose the fight. Driving home that evening, I felt the complex emotions of someone who had finally spoken truth after years of silence. The relief of honesty was mixed with grief over relationships that might never recover. But I had chosen to protect my life's work rather than enable its continued theft. And that choice felt more authentic than anything I'd done in years. The patent revelation had transformed me from Jake's supportive sister into his most dangerous adversary. Whether that transformation represented courage or betrayal depended entirely on one's perspective about what families owe each other and what individuals owe themselves. The cease and desist letter arrived at my apartment on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail with the imposing letterhead of Henderson, Mitchell & Associates, Pittsburgh's most expensive corporate law firm. The message was clear and brutal. I was accused of stealing proprietary family recipes, filing fraudulent patents, and attempting to extort money from Rossetti's Restaurant Group through frivolous intellectual property claims. According to the letter, my patents represented bad faith attempts to misappropriate family intellectual property developed collectively over multiple generations. The firm demanded that I immediately withdraw all patent applications, transfer ownership of any granted patents to Rossetti's Restaurant Group, and cease all attempts to interfere with legitimate business operations. The letter concluded with a threat that chilled me to the bone. If you do not comply with these demands within 30 days, our client will pursue all available legal remedies. including criminal charges for theft of trade secrets and civil litigation seeking monetary damages and injunctive relief. I called Patricia immediately, reading the letter aloud while pacing my kitchen. Her response was swift and reassuring. This is exactly what I expected them to do. Corporate law firms love intimidation tactics, especially when they're representing clients who don't have strong legal positions. Henderson. Mitchell specializes in bulldozing small inventors who can't afford prolonged litigation. Can they actually have me arrested for theft? I asked. The question revealing my deepest fear about confronting my family in court. Absolutely not. You documented everything properly, filed patents using established legal procedures, and have clear evidence of independent development work. Trade secret theft requires proving that you stole confidential information. But your patents are based on your own innovations, not stolen recipes. We scheduled a meeting for Thursday morning to prepare our response and develop strategy for the escalating conflict. Meanwhile, I had to navigate increasingly hostile family dynamics as word spread about the legal dispute. The first casualty was my relationship with Mom. She called Wednesday evening, her voice strained with tears and disappointment. How could you do this to us, Laura? We raised you better than to attack your own family with lawyers. Mom, I'm not attacking anyone. I'm protecting work that belongs to me. Jake has been taking credit for my recipes and planning to franchise them without my permission. That's theft, not family loyalty. Those recipes came from Elena. They're part of our heritage, not something you can own like a piece of property. This legal nonsense is tearing our family apart. The conversation revealed the fundamental divide that made resolution nearly impossible. Mom genuinely believed that family recipes belonged to everyone equally, regardless of who developed or improved them. She couldn't understand how intellectual property law applied to food formulations, nor could she separate family loyalty from business relationships. Our extended family split into opposing camps as details of the conflict became public knowledge. Aunt Rosa and Uncle Anthony supported Dad and Jake, viewing my patents as betrayal of family trust. Cousin Tommy quietly expressed support for my position, having worked closely enough with kitchen operations to understand my actual contributions to recipe development. The most painful defection came from Marcus, our head chef who had watched me develop every patented formulation. Jake pressured Marcus to sign an affidavit stating that the signature recipes were collaborative developments involving multiple family members over extended periods. Marcus reluctantly complied, fearing for his job security and unwilling to choose sides in a family war. Jake's desperation intensified as he realized the legal implications of the franchise agreements he had already signed. Summit Valley Restaurants was demanding delivery of promised recipes and operational systems, threatening to withdraw from their development deal if Rossetti's couldn't provide the intellectual property specified in their contract. During a confrontation at our Penn Hills location, Jake cornered me in the office we used to share as children during family workdays. His charm had been replaced by barely controlled panic as the reality of his situation became clear. "You're going to destroy everything Dad built because you're jealous that I got chosen to run the business," he said, closing the office door to ensure privacy. "This family has given you everything, and this is how you repay us?" "This family has taken credit for my work for years while treating me like an assistant," I replied, maintaining calm despite my rising anger. "You've been planning to franchise recipes that you didn't create and don't own. If that's not theft, what would you call it?" "I'd call it family business. We've always shared everything, Laura. Elena's recipes, Dad's business knowledge, the restaurant locations we built together. You can't suddenly decide that parts of our shared legacy belong only to you, but I can decide that improvements I made to Elena's recipes belong to me. The patents don't cover Elena's original cooking. They cover specific formulations I developed using my education and my time. You wouldn't even know the difference between the original recipes and my enhanced versions." Jake's final attempt at persuasion revealed the depth of his misunderstanding about both business and family relationships. "If you withdraw these patents and license everything back to the family business, I'll make you a full partner. Equal ownership, equal decision-making authority. We can run the business together instead of fighting over it. Under what authority would you make me a partner in a business you're currently destroying through poor management? Besides, partnership requires trust, and you've proven that you'll take credit for my work whenever it suits your purposes. The conversation ended with Jake's threat to fight this to the bitter end, regardless of cost. He was apparently willing to risk bankruptcy defending his right to steal my intellectual property rather than acknowledge that I had created something valuable independently. The legal proceedings began in earnest the following week, when Mitchell filed suit in Allegheny County Court, seeking declaratory judgment that my patents were invalid due to fraudulent misrepresentation of inventorship. They argued that recipes developed for family businesses using family resources belonged to those businesses regardless of who improved or formalized them. Patricia countered with our own legal filing, seeking enforcement of my patent rights and monetary damages for unauthorized use of my intellectual property across 15 restaurant locations over multiple years. We calculated that Rossetti's Restaurant Group owed me approximately $400,000 in licensing fees for past use of my patented formulations. The media attention began almost immediately. Local business journals picked up the story of a family restaurant empire, torn apart by intellectual property disputes. Food industry publications featured articles about the increasing importance of recipe patents in competitive markets. Social media discussions debated the ethics of family members patenting traditional recipes. Customer reactions were swift and largely negative for Rossetti's reputation. Many regular customers felt uncomfortable eating at restaurants involved in ugly family legal battles. Online reviews frequently mentioned disappointment with the drama surrounding a business they had previously trusted and enjoyed. 3 more locations closed permanently as legal costs mounted and customer traffic declined. The remaining locations struggled with inconsistent food quality, as kitchen staff received conflicting instructions about recipes they were allowed to use versus formulations that might violate my patents. Dad's health began deteriorating under the stress of watching his life's work collapse amid family warfare. Mom called me repeatedly, begging me to stop this madness before it kills your father and destroys our family permanently. But Jake continued escalating the conflict, apparently convinced that aggressive legal tactics would force me to surrender my rights rather than endure prolonged litigation. He hired a private investigator to examine my patent applications for any procedural errors that might invalidate them. He subpoenaed my college records, attempting to prove that my recipe development work was somehow improper or fraudulent. The most devastating discovery came when Patricia's investigation revealed that Jake had been attempting to reverse engineer my patented recipes using independent food scientists. His plan involved creating similar but legally distinct formulations that could be used for franchise operations without paying me licensing fees. This reverse engineering effort crossed the line from civil intellectual property dispute into potential criminal territory. Patent law specifically prohibits attempts to design around existing patents for the purpose of avoiding licensing fees. Jake's documented efforts to recreate my formulations could constitute willful patent infringement, carrying much more severe legal penalties than accidental violations. The evidence Patricia gathered painted a picture of systematic bad faith on Jake's part. He wasn't simply defending family recipe traditions. He was actively trying to steal my intellectual property through legal maneuvering and scientific reverse engineering. As winter settled over Pittsburgh and our family war entered its 4th month, I reflected on the devastating irony of the situation. Jake's efforts to prove he deserved to inherit the family business had instead demonstrated exactly why Dad's initial assessment was wrong. Real business leadership required integrity, respect for law, and ability to create value, rather than simply claiming ownership of other people's work. The question was no longer whether I could protect my intellectual property rights. Patricia had assembled overwhelming evidence that my patents were valid and had been violated repeatedly. The question was whether my family would recognize reality before their legal bills and business losses destroyed everything Elena had worked to build. The Allegheny County Courthouse felt like a cathedral of justice as I walked through its marble halls toward the intellectual property hearing that would determine my family's future. 6 months of legal warfare had led to this moment, with Patricia Morrison carrying 3 briefcases full of evidence while Jake sat at the opposing table with 2 attorneys from Henderson, Mitchell, and Associates. Judge Eleanor Patterson, a respected intellectual property specialist with 23 years of federal court experience, reviewed the preliminary evidence during 2 days of testimony. Her questions revealed deep understanding of both patent law and family business dynamics, cutting through emotional arguments to focus on legal facts. Patricia presented our case methodically, beginning with my original lab notebooks dating back 6 years. Every page documented my systematic approach to modernizing Elena's traditional recipes using scientific principles and precise measurements. The notebooks included pH testing results, ingredient sourcing research, and detailed formulation experiments that clearly established my independent development work. Your Honor, these notebooks demonstrate beyond any doubt that Miss Rossetti developed novel formulations through her own expertise and resources, Patricia argued, displaying photographs of my handwritten recipe calculations. The defendant's claim that these recipes belong to the family business ignores the substantial scientific work Miss Rossetti performed to create patentable innovations. Jake's attorneys attempted to characterize my work as minor modifications to existing family recipes that should not qualify for patent protection. They argued that my formulations were obvious improvements that any skilled chef could have developed, therefore failing to meet patent law requirements for novelty and non-obviousness. Judge Patterson's response devastated their argument. Counsel, the evidence shows that despite having access to the original family recipes for decades, no one else in the family business attempted to create standardized formulations or document preparation processes. Miss Rossetti's systematic approach to recipe development demonstrates exactly the type of innovative thinking that patent law is designed to protect. The judge's review of Jake's franchise agreements provided additional evidence supporting my position. His contracts with Summit Valley Restaurants and 2 other potential franchisees explicitly promised to provide proprietary recipes and operational systems developed by Rossetti's restaurant group. The agreements included financial projections based on licensing fees and royalty payments that assumed ownership of intellectual property that belonged to me. Mr. Rossetti, did you consult with patent attorneys before signing these franchise agreements? Judge Patterson asked directly. Jake's stammered response revealed his fundamental carelessness about legal due diligence. We assumed that family recipes used in our business belonged to the business. I didn't think we needed patent searches for grandmother's cooking. But these aren't your grandmother's recipes, are they, Mr. Rossetti? The evidence shows that Miss Rossetti substantially modified and enhanced the original formulations using scientific techniques that your grandmother never employed. You signed contracts promising to license intellectual property that you never owned. The judge's preliminary ruling came after 4 hours of testimony and evidence review. She granted my motion for declaratory judgment, confirming that my patents were valid and had been violated repeatedly by Rossetti's restaurant group's unauthorized use of my formulations across multiple locations over several years. More damaging for Jake's position, Judge Patterson specifically addressed his reverse engineering attempts. The evidence of deliberate efforts to circumvent Miss Rossetti's patents through reverse engineering demonstrates willful infringement, which carries enhanced penalties under federal patent law. The court ordered immediate cessation of all unauthorized use of my patented recipes and processes across every Rossetti's restaurant group location. Jake had 30 days to remove my formulations from all menus, replace them with non-infringing alternatives, or negotiate licensing agreements with me directly. The practical impact was immediate and devastating. Without my signature sauces, spice blends, and preparation methods, the remaining 11 restaurant locations couldn't serve their most popular menu items. The Rosa Rasa sauce that customers drove across town to enjoy was suddenly unavailable. The Nana's secret spice blend that distinguished our pizzas from chain restaurant competitors disappeared overnight. Jake's attempts to replace my formulations with hastily developed alternatives failed spectacularly. The substitute tomato sauce tasted flat and acidic compared to my scientifically balanced Rosa Rosa formulation. The replacement spice blend lacked the complex flavor profile I had spent 2 years perfecting. Customer complaints and negative reviews flooded our social media pages within the first week. The franchise agreements collapsed immediately, as potential partners realized they couldn't receive the intellectual property they had contracted to license. Summit Valley Restaurants demanded return of their development fees and threatened additional litigation for breach of contract. 2 other franchise prospects withdrew from negotiations entirely. unwilling to risk association with a company embroiled in intellectual property disputes. Dad finally faced the mathematical reality of his situation during a tense family meeting at our corporate office. The accounting firm presented quarterly reports showing losses exceeding $200,000 across all remaining locations. Legal fees had consumed an additional $150,000, with Henderson Mitchell demanding another $75,000 retainer to continue defending the patent case. "We can't sustain these losses much longer," Dad admitted, his voice hollow with defeat. "The legal bills alone are destroying us, even before we factor in lost revenue from menu changes and customer defections." Jake's response demonstrated his continued inability to accept responsibility for the crisis he had created. "This is temporary turbulence while we develop replacement recipes. Once we establish new signature items, customers will return and franchise opportunities will resurface." Uncle Anthony, who had watched 3 of his managed locations close permanently during the legal battle, finally spoke the truth everyone else was afraid to voice. "Jake, there won't be any customers left to return if we keep serving inferior food while fighting legal battles we can't win or afford." The breaking point came when our corporate bank, Allegheny Valley National, demanded immediate repayment of our business line of credit due to material adverse changes in business operations and legal standing. The bank had monitored our declining revenues and mounting legal costs, concluding that Rossetti's restaurant group no longer represented acceptable credit risk. Without access to operating credit, Jake couldn't meet payroll for our remaining employees or pay suppliers who were already demanding cash on delivery due to our deteriorating financial condition. The empire Elena had built through 50 years of hard work was collapsing in real time, destroyed by her grandson's arrogance and legal malpractice. The most painful moment came when Mom called me directly, bypassing Dad and Jake entirely. Her voice was broken with exhaustion and grief as she begged me to consider some form of compromise that might save what remained of our family business. "Laura, I know you have every right to protect your work, but watching this family destroy itself is killing me. Your father hasn't slept properly in months, and Jake is talking about declaring bankruptcy to escape the legal debts. Isn't there some way we can resolve this without losing everything Elena worked to build?" I had reached my own emotional breaking point, watching people I loved suffer consequences of decisions I never wanted to force them to make. The satisfaction of legal victory felt hollow when measured against the destruction of family relationships and business legacy. But before I could respond to Mom's plea, my phone rang with news that would change everything. Patricia Morrison was calling to inform me that Megacorp Food Industries had requested a meeting to discuss licensing opportunities that might provide solutions no one had previously considered. "They've been monitoring the intellectual property case and are interested in your formulations for their restaurant supply division," Patricia explained. "They're thinking about licensing deals worth potentially $50 million over 10 years. As I hung up the phone, I realized that justice didn't always require destroying the people who had wronged me. Sometimes it meant finding ways for everyone to recognize value and move forward together. The empire was falling, but perhaps something better could rise from its ashes. 6 months later, I stood in the gleaming kitchen of Elena's Kitchen, our flagship location in Shadyside, watching the dinner rush unfold with the smooth precision of a Swiss watch. The restaurant buzzed with the energy of a successful business built on respect, quality, and authentic family traditions enhanced by modern innovation. The morning's Pittsburgh Business Journal lay folded on my office desk, featuring a cover story about the remarkable resurrection of a restaurant family. The article detailed how the collapse of Rossetti's restaurant group had led to something unprecedented, a female-led restaurant empire that honored tradition while embracing change. The transformation began with that phone call from Megacorp Food Industries. Their proposition was elegant in its simplicity. They wanted to license my patented formulations for distribution to independent restaurants nationwide, creating a business model that generated revenue without requiring me to operate multiple locations directly. The licensing deal provided the financial foundation for my new venture while offering a path toward family reconciliation. Megacorp's $50 million commitment over 10 years gave me resources to build something entirely my own while providing licensing opportunities for family members who were willing to work within legal frameworks that respected intellectual property rights. Elena's Kitchen opened 4 months after the courthouse victory with a team that included Marcus as executive chef, 3 former Rossetti's managers who had reached out privately during the legal battle, and surprisingly, Jake as front-of-house manager. His journey from CEO to employee represented the most dramatic personal transformation of anyone involved in our family crisis. The conversation that led to Jake's employment happened on a snowy February afternoon at our parents' house. Dad had finally swallowed his pride enough to request a meeting, not as my former boss or disappointed father, but as someone who needed to understand how we might rebuild what had been broken. "I was wrong about you, Laura," Dad said, the words clearly difficult for him to speak. "I confused loudness with leadership and charisma with competence. You've demonstrated business skills that Jake and I never developed or even recognized as important." Jake's apology was even more meaningful because it came with genuine self-reflection rather than mere acknowledgement of defeat. "I spent so many years taking credit for your work that I convinced myself I actually understood how restaurants succeed. Watching you build Elena's Kitchen from nothing has taught me more about business than all my years of pretending to be in charge." His role at Elena's Kitchen was carefully structured to utilize his strengths while preventing the type of overreach that had destroyed Rossetti's restaurant group. Jake excelled at customer relationships, staff motivation, and community outreach. Within clear boundaries and proper supervision, his natural charm became an asset rather than a liability. The menu at Elena's Kitchen told the story of our family's evolution. We featured my grandmother's traditional recipes alongside my enhanced formulations, clearly crediting both sources and explaining how modern techniques had improved flavor consistency without sacrificing authenticity. Customers appreciated the transparency and educational approach, feeling connected to both our heritage and our innovation. Our success attracted attention from Food Network, which produced a documentary about family businesses that survive crisis through adaptation and reconciliation. The filming process provided opportunities for family members to share their perspectives about tradition, change, and the delicate balance between honoring the past and building the future. During one particularly emotional interview, Mom described her pride in watching her daughter create something meaningful from the ashes of family conflict. "I used to worry that Laura wasn't ambitious enough to succeed in business. Now I understand that her approach to success was just different from what Frank and I expected. She built something sustainable instead of just claiming ownership of what other people created." The financial success of Elena's Kitchen enabled us to offer employment opportunities to family members who had lost their positions when Rossetti's restaurant group collapsed. Aunt Rosa joined our accounting department. Uncle Anthony became facilities manager for our planned expansion, and Cousin Tommy took charge of maintenance and equipment across all locations. Most surprisingly, we were able to purchase the original Penn Hills location where Elena had started cooking professionally 60 years earlier. The building had been vacant since Rossetti's closure, and transforming it into Elena's Kitchen felt like completing a circle of family history. Dad's health improved dramatically once the legal stress ended and family relationships began healing. He took on the role of company historian, working with local food writers to document Elena's legacy and our family's contribution to Pittsburgh's restaurant culture. The project gave him purpose while honoring his own decades of hard work building the original business. The Megacorp licensing deal exceeded all projections, generating enough revenue to fund rapid expansion without the debt and franchising complications that had destroyed Jake's dreams. Within 18 months, Elena's Kitchen operated 6 company-owned locations across Pennsylvania, with plans for controlled expansion into Ohio and West Virginia. But the most meaningful success wasn't measured in financial terms. It was found in the rebuilt relationships, the restored family trust, and the knowledge that we had found a way to honor Elena's legacy while creating something uniquely our own. As I reviewed the evening's receipts in my office, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The little girl who had learned to cook at Elena's side could never have imagined the legal battles, family warfare, and personal transformation that would be required to protect her grandmother's true legacy. The patents that had caused so much family anguish had ultimately become tools for building something better than what we had lost. They protected my intellectual property rights, while creating opportunities for everyone to contribute according to their abilities and interests. Justice hadn't required destroying anyone. It had simply required that everyone acknowledge truth about who created what value. Elena's portrait hung in the main dining room of every restaurant location, surrounded by photographs documenting our family's evolution from traditional Italian immigrants to modern American business owners. Customers often asked about the woman in the faded photograph, giving us opportunities to share stories about determination, innovation, and the courage required to build something meaningful. The business lessons I had learned were equally important as the family ones. Success required more than good recipes or charming personalities. It demanded systematic thinking, legal knowledge, financial planning, and the ability to adapt traditional approaches to modern realities. These were skills that could be developed by anyone willing to invest the time and effort required. Most importantly, I had learned that protecting your work doesn't make you selfish, and standing up for yourself doesn't make you disloyal. Family relationships that require you to accept theft or disrespect aren't healthy relationships, regardless of shared DNA or common history. As I prepared to lock up the restaurant and head home, I thought about the question that had started this entire journey. What does it take to succeed in business? The answer wasn't about having the loudest voice or the most confident personality. It was about creating genuine value, protecting what you build, and finding ways to lift everyone up together. What challenges have you faced in your own family or workplace when your contributions weren't recognized or properly credited? How did you find the courage to stand up for yourself while maintaining important relationships? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life tales about finding strength in unexpected places. Share this story with anyone who might need encouragement to protect their own valuable work. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that you have more power than you realize to shape your own destiny.